let's go on to these 5 more new releases. What you'd expect, sequel and a remake, a couple of Jenna Ortega movies, and Wes Anderson coming back to us, so this is gonna go up and down. So let's start with Mission Impossible, obviously this one being called The Final Reckoning, after it was going to do the whole Dead Reckoning Part 1 and 2 thing. And obviously they're building up this being the last movie in the franchise, and that would lead a lot of people to say, like, is it really though? Because a lot of people say that all the time about various different franchises, and they always find a way. There is the whole thing about them, like, wanting to Glenn Powell to do it, and I think Cruise said, like, Glenn Powell's the only person he would let do it, but Glenn Powell also said that he's, like, not very interested, and he didn't want to do stunts and stuff like that, so when they say that they're, like, ending this, for the first hour or so of the movie, they really seem to show how serious they are about actually ending it, which, for me personally, is kind of a relief, because I was a little worried about that. It's like, are you sure, though? Even though Cruise is getting up there in age, he seems pretty unstoppable at this point. But now that he's gone on to, like, do the Inarritu movie and stuff like that, hopefully that's kind of the direction he's continuing to go now. But, yeah, as far as this being what appears to be an actually definitive ending to this franchise, and the way they're going about that by using techniques that are more or less the same that you would see as far as other franchises saying this is for sure the end and we're going to tie everything up to every other movie and do that whole thing. And there's other things that they probably could have done that might have been obvious also, and I'm glad that those are routes they didn't go down, but the main thing they seem to really stick to is, let's have this connect to, like, every single movie that's happened. And while that is something that we've seen before, I do like that there actually were kind of openings to do that in this franchise, particularly the use of the rabbit's foot. And maybe that's because Mission Impossible 3 is still my favorite of the franchise, personally. I know a lot of people sort of like them much better as McQuarrie's kind of taken over, and a lot of people love Ghost Protocol. 3 was always mine and still continues to be mine. So the fact that this actually gives some sort of meaning to that rabbit's foot mystery that was never solved is an interesting way to tie it in, I think. But we're going, like every movie gets touched on at some point, and we're seeing, like, clips and everything. It's, like, half of it's, like, does feel like a celebration of the franchise itself. The other half sort of feels like you just do not trust that we have any memory of the previous movies, dude, because you just keep, like, every time they make even the slightest reference to a previous movie, we get, like, an entire clip show. And that's pretty much what the entire first hour is, and it was kind of alarming, because the entire first hour being this repetitive and exposition heavy and just, like, almost being a clip show of the franchise it wore it down really fast. And so I was kind of worried in that first hour. It's like, is this gonna maybe pick up from here? Because you're really, really building up, like, this is gonna be something really, truly incredible and amazing as far as a note to go out on. But, yeah, once it picks up after that first hour, then it kind of becomes the Mission Impossible movie that you would want and what you would expect. Particularly, I've noticed how much they surprisingly don't build up the water stunts in these movies, because I remember when Rogue Nation came out, the one they really built up and the one they really advertised and the one they just kept talking and talking about was him at the beginning hanging on the side of the plane as it took off, which of course is, you know, an iconic shot in action movies now, and obviously, and I think Cruise said, like, that's, like, the most terrifying thing he's ever done of all of these stunts, so there is a reason for that, but I was always surprised how little press the underwater sequence in Rogue Nation got, because that's like the sequence of the movie for me, personally, the 5th movie. And so in this one also, again, a lot of attention drawn to the plane stunt, which we will get to, like, all the way down to the point that it's, like, the poster of the movie. But I don't remember hearing any build-up for this whole silent underwater sequence that's, like, 20 minutes long. It's like the Rafifi heist of the Mission Impossible movies. And I love the fact that there's no, like, back and forth editing. Like, while he's down there, doing what he's doing, there's not, like, we're not, like, cutting back to land or what other people are doing or what character, because characters are all over the place in all different locations throughout the movie. So I love the way we stayed on this sequence. We stayed underwater this whole time without cutting away to something else. And that really adds, like, that whole breathless feeling of what he's doing. And so I was really... And, like, there's no... like, at one point he eventually says, like, torpedo tubes, like, really late in the sequence. I think that's the only dialogue in the whole sequence, which is amazing. So, when you build up to that and you realize that they are really trying to go as all in as possible, and they've built it up that that's what they were doing, this is the kind of stuff that you would want and would hope for. And also calling back to other things where normally it would be like this sort of cheap fan service thing to, like, bring people back. Like, I know Emilio Estevez was asked a lot, like, hey man, do you think you might still be alive? And he had to say repeatedly in interviews, my head got impaled by that elevator, there's no coming back from that. But somebody that did come back, and interestingly enough, this wasn't, like, at least to me, it wasn't a surprise, because I remember knowing this when Dead Reckoning was out, that this second one would bring back Rolf Saxon, who played Damo in the original movie. The one that he had to keep luring out of the room so he could do the famous thing where he can't touch the floor, and bringing that guy into it. And that's one of those things where you would think it'd be like maybe some one-off scene, or it's like, oh, it's that guy. But the fact that this is, like, this guy's, like, a full character in this movie, and his like, little redemption arc goes above and beyond, and he becomes a really crucial part of what's going on here. Like, the final part of the mission could not happen without him. And I actually really love that, because it's just like this side character in the first movie that just really got a lot of things he didn't deserve. A lot of bad things happened to him that he didn't deserve. And so to bring this character back in this really big way, there's, like, a charm to it, and I just really love that. And seeing, like, he has, like, a whole family life and everything after this banishment that was punishment for what happened in the first movie. That's something else that's, like, a really, really good tie around. Like, that and the way the Rabbit's Foot factors in, that's the way you, like, bring in, like, the whole franchise in a really good way. And you've also got a pretty stacked supporting cast here. The trouble is that not a lot of them have a lot to do. Like, obviously, Angela Bassett's here, Holt McCallany, Nick Offerman, Hannah Waddingham, who I would have thought would have had a bigger part, but she doesn't. Jana McTeer. And they're all just kind of here to be the people in, like, you know, the military outfits that make decisions, and we occasionally cut back to them. And there is tensity there for sure. Offerman in particular has, I guess you could call it a big scene. It also felt like it was surprisingly under-dramatic, where Offerman goes, I guess you could say. But story-wise, it still works. But I think I would have liked to have seen a bit more of that supporting cast in particular, especially since there's so much movie going on. But once again, there is a lot of stuff going on here, and the movie's almost 3 hours, so I get if they probably had, like, meatier parts that had to be cut down eventually, would be my guess. So that's something that's, as far as bringing, like, a whole cast in, and there's always a recognizable face around the corner, that's always nice, regardless, because you see, like, the sort of reverence for the franchise and the people that would want to be in it, even if it's a small role, and how, like, significant these names are and how busy these actors are, that everybody would want a piece of this franchise one more time, is a nice feeling also. So, talking about this plane sequence at the end, which I really love because I try to avoid, you know, like, TV spots and trailers and advertising and all that stuff, so I can go into something as fresh as possible. So the only thing I really knew about this plane sequence at the end was that he's really on, like, one of those planes, and sometimes it's going upside down, and I had seen, like, maybe one still image of this and the poster that shows it off. And what I love about that is that because I didn't really know much other than that. I did not realize just how spectacular this stunt is. Because my first thought is like, yeah, we've seen him on planes many times. So it's like, oh, he's on a plane again. Okay, that's like old news for Tom Cruise, right? But no, this is a really, really stellar, dangerous, fantastic sequence. And I really love that I didn't really see too much of it beforehand. To the point, so my expectations for it were kind of like, just like in the middle, like, but so that really, really exceeded that. But also, I think what's also really great about it is the way some of the other hyped up stunts have fallen short. Not because the stunts aren't amazing, because they obviously are, and he's obviously always endangering his life in some way. But it's the way in those previous movies that they built up these stunts and then basically covered them up in CGI. Like, he's really doing all the shit, but then they put so much around it. It's like like I said, it's almost like it's covering up like the skydive at the beginning of Fallout, where he and Henry Cavill jump, and they filmed this whole sequence of of them actually falling, and then they put that storm in there. So like most of the time the stunt is covered up by CGI clouds. That just seemed counterproductive. And then another like real letdown was the jump in Dead Reckoning, where watching the actual footage of him just like going down the giant ramp and doing the jump is much more exhilarating than what's in the movie. Because everything is so covered up. He's like, you know, he's on the bike going through grass that's clearly not actually there, and just all this shoddy CGI is surrounding this actual stunt. And so this one, I like that it just doesn't seem covered up by anything. It just feels like we're watching what we're actually watching, like the helicopter sequence at the end of Fallout. It's much more like that. Only obviously he's much more exposed to the elements this time around. And that is like a really, really satisfying sequence. Like I said, especially if you were like me and you hadn't really seen, I don't know how much like the TV spots or trailers or anything showed, but I like the fact that I felt like, even having seen a couple of stills, when I watched the actual sequence, I felt like I had not seen any of that before, and especially in context, it's all great because. And I think actually another thing that's impressive about how much it works in context is the fact that there's not really a lot in regards to, like, you know, plot or anything like that. Like, most of these, like, the whole Mission Impossible thing is typically, like we were just talking about with the Rabbit's Foot, the plots are going to be driven by, like, MacGuffins. It doesn't really matter what's going on. I remember when I was kind of checking out of Dead Reckoning was the whole entity thing really felt like some sort of shark jumping plot to me. Like, it was, like, way over the top, in the AI, like, is this world what we actually think it is, or whatever? And I like the fact that they didn't really get too hung up on that in this one, and it's more about, oh, you know, Gabriel has this thing, we gotta get that thing from him, and that's all you really need to worry about. And it's like, yeah, for a movie that's almost 3 hours, to have that thin of a plot does seem like maybe iffy, but when you're building up to these, the main problem as far as the length goes is that first hour that's just basically nonstop exposition. But seeing the team come together that we've known this whole time, and Ving Rhames especially getting a really sort of big send-off with this series, just everything comes together nicely. And like, even if it's not something, like, it's still not, you know, like, my favorite of the franchise. To me, it doesn't, like, match 3 or anything like that. And I think a lot of people's favorite tends to be Fallout, which would be a second place for me personally. Where just, as far as, like, you know, character and the little bit of plot that we get and the action sequences and how everything ties together, definitely feels much more cohesive without feeling like it's a bit bloated or like it's drawn out by exposition. Because like we were saying, it's interesting for a movie that's so thin plot-wise to have nearly an hour of exposition. You realize just how not particularly necessary it is, because that's not really what anybody's here for anyway, and they know that. So the fact that they went all in as much as they possibly could, and obviously it starts with the introduction where Cruise, like, thanks us for being there, for, like, having the theater experience still with movies that are this gigantic, and the fact that he and the people he works with just goes like completely all in to do all this stuff. Obviously, Top Gun Maverick was my favorite movie of 2022. So I'm very much appreciative of all this and all this stuff that's going on here. Thin plot, regardless, but it is, definitely satisfying as far as an ending goes, and I'm perfectly happy with that. You just gotta get past that first hour or so, which can be a bit of a slog. So, let's go on to Lilo and Stitch, which is the next live-action Disney remake. Again, we have the same discussion every time. I don't get worked up about this stuff. All these movies getting remade, I grew up with, just like everybody else, and they're just so insignificant to me that I don't care one way or the other that they exist. It's like the originals are still there and they're just fine, and you can go back to them. You can even go back to them instead of choosing to pay to hate watch these, because paying to hate watch these is just continuing to make them happen, so you're shooting yourselves in the foot, but whatever, you can't get that through anybody's head. And this one in particular, I feel like I have an attachment to also. Like, obviously I didn't, like, grow up with it from, like, the second I had memories as a child, like I did for a lot of movies that have been remade now, but this one still, I would have been like 11 when Lilo and Stitch came out, and I remember it was one of the first movies that I saw multiple times in the theater, and I had like, the stuffed Stitch where you could take off his spacesuit, and he had and the arms were attached to it and stuff like that. I think he talked. I was really down the Lilo and Stitch rabbit hole when it came out. And so, yeah, and it's a movie that I haven't watched a lot in adulthood, but I still vividly remember. I still, like, find myself making, before this one even existed, I would still find myself making references to it, even though I hadn't seen it in, like, 20 years. And it did really stick. So, and the fact that, you have a director like Dean Fleischer Camp, who just did Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, that was something where it's like, I know a lot of these Disney properties especially, it's like, sometimes a lot of the time it doesn't really matter which director they hire, because it ends up just being like a producer's vision. Somebody who's there to make money's vision. But I had room with this one where I was like, I don't think this could be, completely terrible or completely pointless. The first thing that really made an impact was when we saw what Stitch was going to look like, because the first thing you thought when you heard about a Lilo and Stitch live-action movie was, how do you do that? I mean, obviously he's going to be animated, but it's like, to make him look like he's in the real world, how the fuck are you going to pull that off? And then we saw those first, like, images of him, and it's like, wow, he looks really good. Like, he looks shockingly good. Like, I think everybody's expectations had to have been exceeded when we saw what Stitch was going to look like in this movie. And then when we would see, like, advertisements or whatever, or, like, sponsorships or whatever, and we saw him in motion, and it was like, as far as, like, what he looks like, this seems to be working. So that's a good start. So, going into the actual movie itself, it is kind of what you expect, where a lot of the movie for a while is pretty much frame by frame the animated movie, just in live action, like CGI and then human characters and all that. But the only difference being that everything feels a bit busier. Like, even despite how energetic the animated movie is, this one somehow feels more hyper. Which, like I said, is probably to be expected, and that might be something. There's also the absence of Gantu, which, and I don't mean to, like, piss anybody off or anything, but like I said, I was there when this movie came out. I remember the first time I saw it in the theater, and then the subsequent times I saw it still in the theater, and then when the DVD came out. And before it came out, this fury had come out about the fact that Gantu was not in this movie, that he had been cut out of it. And it was like, I didn't know there was such an attachment to that character. I had to kind of think for a second to remind myself who he was, because yeah, he's like the villain and he's the catalyst of the action in the climax, but that's basically it. like, he's not really that significant of a character apart from, you know, being in the... Like, really, if there's any sort of antagonist, it feels more like the... Hannah Waddingham, of course, is back in this movie also. Who is well cast enough, but is also just a voice. But yeah, I would say I remembered her more than I remembered Gantu, and then it was like I didn't really know where the rage was coming from, and that's when it's like. Then again, when you look at these Disney live-action remakes, most of the time, the rage feels a bit performative to me, where it's like, if you know, put a camera in front of you and you shriek because a live-action Disney remake is existing or about to exist, people are gonna feed on that, and they're gonna give you views, and they're gonna do that whole thing. It's just really... we went through this whole thing with Snow White most recently. They're just so insignificant to me, and sometimes I don't mind them. Like, a couple here and there. Like, everybody seems to agree that that Favreau's The Jungle Book is fine, which it is. And this one, I've seen it go both ways. There's people that are fine with this one, there's people that are throwing a holy shit fit. Just because it's almost like it's almost expected of them, so they just do it. Because there's not really... if there's something about this that's... Because when you look at what people are mad at, it's one of two ways. Either it's the exact same movie and it doesn't need to exist, or they made some changes to make sure it wasn't the exact same movie, and people get pissed off because they changed stuff. It's just lose-lose. I guess you could also say that's another reason to just not do it at all. But, like there are moments where I was feeling there's not a lot of point to this when they were doing it scene by scene and line by line. And it's like they were even doing the same jokes. Like like when he escapes in the ship and they say he took the red one, and the alien that says he went to Earth. And it's like, the same jokes being in there is something where it's like, you couldn't have maybe changed those, because we already laughed at those in 2002. And any time we've rewatched it, so that's something you could probably change up, is the jokes, you would think. But, so sticking with those felt very much like, we're just copying and pasting, this feels a little pointless. So that I can get. But, when it's, and there's, stuff where, like, they'll kind of cut out jokes a little bit rather than adding to them, like when they're doing the thing when she's trying to communicate with Lilo from behind the social worker, and she talks about, in the animated when she talks about the bricks in the pillowcase. I'm pretty sure that wasn't here this time, which, I mean, maybe that makes sense now, but, yeah, so you could see where, as far as, like, on the joke front, there's kind of a... like, they didn't really try to do anything else, so that's unfortunate. But as far as the way it looks, I still feel like it can't be understated how really good it looks. Even down to, like, when you talk about bringing the animation to life, even, like, Lilo's weird doll, the way they brought that to life, it feels, like, really exact in this way that's impressive. That's one of those cases where it's like, when you can translate it perfectly to live action, is a case where, like, it being exactly the same is kind of impressive, as far as, like, that adaptation goes. But there's also other cases where they made changes that have been criticized, like Jumbo and Pleakley being in human form a lot of the time, and I'm half and half on this one, because, like I said, everything looks great. Even Jumbo looks great when we first see him in his actual form. And then, of course, Jumbo is Zach Galifianakis here, and Pleakley is Billy Magnussen, who I've talked many times about how I'm a really big Billy Magnussen fan. And when I heard he was, like, going to be a live-action Pleakley, I was like, yeah, he can pull that. I'm confident he can pull that off. And I say that as somebody who's, like, Pleakley was, like, my favorite character in the animated movie, besides, like, you know, Lilo and Stitch themselves. So, going on that, it does seem like a waste to have the actors doing... like, actually being there for a lot of it, and not bringing in those fantastical elements, especially working on how good Jumbo looks. However, with all that being said, how good bringing the characters to life looks for the most part, we can all agree, right, that Pleakley looked pretty rough, CGI-wise. So the idea of making him Billy Madison most of the time makes sense to me. So, and the fact that he could pull that off, like, in his human form and still be very Bleakley-like, was working for me for the most part. But, yeah, Jumba pre actually looking like Galifianakis worked already as is. So, like I said, I'm kind of half and half on that, where I understand if they wanted to cover up maybe a weaker aspect when the CGI came through, with something that still works in its own right. But, and they also kind of show an appreciation by bringing in, like, the cast from the original movie. Like, I believe Chris Sanders is still doing Stitch, which is great, because nobody else can do that for sure. But, like, bringing Tia Carrere in, now live action, who was Nani in the original movie, who's now the social worker, but then you have to get into this whole thing of, now there's a new social worker character that's not actually Bubbles. And Bubbles is now like a Jesus, I'm saying CGI so many times, CIA character that poses as a social worker, and it's like, did we need these to be two characters? I don't think we did. Oh, I think we could have just done Bubbles. I don't know if they really wanted to work in having Tia Carrere in the movie and they didn't know where else to put her, so they did this splitting up of a social worker character, but I don't really know what the point of that was, but there was also Jason Scott Lee is here briefly, who was David in the original movie. Amy Hill, who I almost forgot, is also a voice in the animated movie, is here as, I think it's like David's grandma, who kind of has this sort of maternal presence throughout it. And that's another thing that I've seen where people are upset about changes, is there's a lot going on with Nani in this one, and a lot of focus put on that, and what this ultimately leads to as far as a conclusion. And again, I'm wary to go into this because of how upset people get, but it's like, I kind of don't mind I'm assuming anybody that's going to come across this either doesn't care about spoilers or has already seen it, have seen the movie. So, talking about this change at the end, spoilers, I guess, with the guardianship angle, and how Nani kind of gives it to David and his grandma while she goes off to college. I don't really get why people are so angry about that, especially, number one, because Nani deserves her own life also, but secondly, I don't know why people are so upset, because they cop out anyway with the portal gun, Jumba's portal gun that she gets, so she doesn't even really leave. But, like I said, a lot of the outrage about certain aspects of this movie, or its existence in general, I understand where it's coming from, and like everybody's feelings are valid and all that, as far as this is how they feel about this movie and they don't want it tampered with or whatever, and they see it as something sacred for them or whatever. That's fine. But like, there's also people where it just feels really performative and it's tiresome, and they can take a breather. Like, it would do them a lot of good to just say, this movie could be totally insignificant for me. I could watch the original movie, completely forget this one exists, and I'll be a happier person. For some reason, they don't take that route, but like I said, there's more views and attention to be had if you're shrieking, I guess. But, yeah, so really, like, they do the thing that live-action Disney remakes have been doing, which is making it longer for no reason at all. Like I said, adding more of a chaos to it, like a shorter attention span to it. Which, like I said, talking about the mania that's in the original movie, it's surprising to think, oh, surely they can't go more over the top with that than an animated movie can. So we get stuff like the check engine warning bit with Stitch, or when he goes to like a wedding reception, and it's like, there's just sort of this whole middle portion where they just try to find ways for him to cause chaos until Lilo finds him. And so it's like, you can see where they're like stretching it, and there's cases where, like I was talking about with the jokes, and not really changing or elaborating on the jokes, just literally doing the same ones. Just stuff like that feels like you could have done something else, or just feels like a pointless exercise or whatever. But there's also plenty in this that I'm fine with. And like I said, it can't be understated that most of the CGI looks really, really good. And that's where a lot of these can really fail and sort of suck the life out of what was once in there. But this is, I feel like, is one of the... Is, when you look at a lot of the other ones they've done, this has to be in the upper tier. Regardless of where your bar is on that, I would say that would have to be where it lies for a lot of people. And there's also going to be people that are just totally blowing out of proportion, saying it's an abomination and it shouldn't exist and it's a travesty or something. And it's like, those people are just really silly to me. and I feel like there's an insincerity in it, so that's how I feel about that. So it's fine. I don't really give a shit that it exists. It's fine. So let's go on now to the Phoenician Scheme. Let's go from, a corporate product to Wes Anderson, to completely different sides of the movie-making spectrum. And obviously, I've been talking a lot about how we've got so many big and established directors, and directors we all love, doing movies this year in the second half of the year, and it's so exciting. And one of the people at the top of that list was, we're getting another Wes Anderson movie, which is amazing. And once again, I've been on this side of Wes Anderson, where it's like, a lot of people seem to be kind of pulling away a little bit, because they almost think he's sort of becoming too Wes Anderson-y, like he's becoming almost a parody of himself at this point. And I've been saying that the more he leans into himself, the more I'm just really... I mean, I've always loved his movies, but I'm particularly loving this recent era where he's just leaning as far into himself as he can. And just every single movie is covered in his signature. And I really love that. One of my favorite movies of the last few years was The French Dispatch. And a lot of people... To my surprise, a lot of people don't care for The French Dispatch, and I feel like that's like one of his peaks. Still my favorite Wes Anderson movie, and I imagine a lot of people are on the same page, is The Grand Budapest Hotel. Unless you long for like the Rushmore days, which I get, but for me, The Grand Budapest Hotel is like the ultimate Wes Anderson at this point. And like anything at this rate, the more he's leaning into himself, does feel like this sort of... Here's Grand Budapest, and it's like, it's here in that underneath area where it's like, we know we're just not going to reach that, but we still just want to bask in the world enough that it's perfectly satisfying as it is. So if you go into it and it's pure 100% Wes Anderson, that's satisfying. Like, whatever the story is, whoever is in it, whatever the characters are like, a Wes Anderson movie is a Wes Anderson movie, and that's just always going to be satisfying on some level. Because he's just reached that point to where he can do this. And, like, every time you see, like, his production design, or the performances in the movies, and the ideas, the visual ideas, whatever it may be, the comedy, like, I always say it cannot be stressed enough how funny his movies are, because a lot of people talk about them on, like, a technical scale, like the production design, and people always talk about the symmetry and stuff like that, and it's like, I don't know that enough people mention one of the first and foremost things that make Wes Anderson movies great is that they are so funny. And this continues with that. This movie is extremely funny. And it's like, as far as plot goes, we kind of just talked about this Mission Impossible, where it's like, I don't really know that the story is particularly the point in this one. There's times where, like, the story can sneak up on you with how good it is. Like, when, I think a lot of people, including me, when we first went to the Grand Budapest Hotel back in 2014, we had no idea what the story was going to be. We just knew it was a huge ensemble cast in a hotel, and we could not have predicted how good the story and plot of that movie is. And so here, that's not going to be something that happens. At least it didn't happen to me. Where this feels much more like there's kind of it's even kind of a vague plot. Like, it almost feels like it's kind of intentional that you only seem to maybe half know exactly what's going on and exactly what Del Toro's character is trying to accomplish as he goes from character to character. It does feel like it's just sort of a... let's just go moment to moment and have these eccentric characters do their thing, and then we go on to the next one, and it's just a series of characters. And once again, in Wes Anderson's world, that's a gift. Like, that's like the least we could ask for. And it's great when you have stuff like the Bryan Cranston and Tom Hanks scene. You've got Michael Cera here, who's one of the consistent characters. And I know a lot of people have been... I'm going to do this Michael Cera detour now. The characters are great, but this Cera character in particular, a lot of people... He's been, like, bombarded since Cannes and all the interviews after where it's like, you know, everybody's saying that you're the perfect fit for Wes Anderson to the point that we can't believe you haven't worked together before now. It's like, he's probably so sick of hearing that at this point. And while that is true also, this is another case of, like, exceeded expectations, where even if you were expecting something, some sort of greatness between them that you've been anticipating, what they concocted with this character, and the fact that, I'm hoping without saying too much, the fact that Cera basically gives 2 performances, which is something that I just always have loved. When an actor can do that, where it's like you have like one performance that's going on, and then you have a completely different performance that not only are you starting to watch, but you realize has kind of been the performance the whole time in this hidden way. And it's one of those things where you can go back and see the performance in like different ways once certain things are revealed about this character, and it's fantastic. It's probably the standout performance in the movie, even though it is, like, everybody's really bringing it here, as they do in Wes Anderson movies. We also have Kate Winslet's daughter. I can't remember if she's been in anything else or if this is a debut, but she is impressive. It is, like, for not having much experience outside of it being literally in your blood. And being, like, kind of a co-lead in this, next to Del Toro, by the way. Del Toro, who was one of the standouts of The French Dispatch, of course. And so, like, everything in this world, like, Anderson's one of those directors that I just trust, like, anybody that he's going to cast. Is, like, I trust wherever he's going to put them or whatever he's going to do with them is going to be perfectly fit for them. Whether they're a lead or a co-lead, or they're in it for, like, 2 seconds. It's going to be perfectly tailored to them, just like everything else in the movie was perfectly tailored to everything. And it'll just have like those little moments of dialogue where you just know you're watching a Wes Anderson movie. Like Del Toro has a line that's, "There's much to explain, and it's all in these shoeboxes." Like you just take that line out of context, you know it's a Wes Anderson line. There's also "Help yourself to a hand grenade." It just these things. And another thing I've talked about also, especially in the Grand Budapest territory, is when Anderson's working with dark comedy is especially just perfect. And there's plenty of that dark side of Anderson in this movie also. Like, the opening scene is something that just immediately catches you off guard in this really dark way, but also hilarious way. And it's like, in that moment in particular, when something happens to a character in the first, like, 20 seconds, if that, I immediately felt like, okay, this is gonna be what I want it to be. and Anderson has that thing where it's like, you don't have to sit down with his movies for very long before you realize that they're going to be what you want them to be. Or you might learn quickly that maybe it's gonna not be it's not gonna be one of your favorite Andersons or something like that. But regardless, you know how you're gonna feel really early on, and that's something I really appreciate also. And really shows just, like I said, the way he's leaned into himself and the way he just knows his tones at this point. You feel like every frame of this movie, he just is somebody that's so confident in himself and comfortable with his style and just knows exactly what he's doing at all times. And that's, yeah. Another actor I wanted to single out was Jeffrey Wright, who's not here a lot, but he has that great moment in Asteroid City where he shows off how fast he can do Wes Anderson dialogue. And obviously, after demonstrating that in Asteroid City, Anderson was like, okay, that's definitely a strength that I can put when I put him in my movies, so that, and when you see, and it doesn't feel like it's doing the same thing, or it's like it's falling back on one thing or something. It's like just, he noticed a strength that Jeffrey Wright can have with his dialogue, and then he's just continuing to utilize that in this great way that's very funny. So, And on top of that, while I was saying that the plot itself is pretty thin, there is another layer of the movie going on where it's kind of Del Toro, like, sort of discovering his sort of moral sides, because he's a very immoral character to start with, but now that he's also been the victim of several attempts on his life, as we learn, like the opening scene is like the 6th attempt, I think he said, on his life, and he's a character that, like, just can't be killed, and so that's starting to make him sort of have this sort of moral thing going on in his head. So we have this other thing going on where we get, like, this sort of look into the afterlife that we keep coming back to, these black and white scenes where we get, like, biblical imagery and, like, God and angels and all this stuff and people previously in his life and stuff like that. It feels like almost Monty Python inspired, the way these scenes play out and the way they're just the appearance of them. And that I've also got that vibe through. I've gotten the Monty Python vibe before in Anderson movies as far as the humor goes, and this is another one where it kind of sort of, it's not heavy, it's never been heavy, but here it just sort of creeps in a little bit too, in a way that's very welcome. So I love that, and the way they sort of are looking into this, the characters looking into, like, the moral aspects of himself and sort of pondering this afterlife and the ways you can go in life and doing that. So there is another layer to this. It's not necessarily just, oh, it's funny and it's got, you know, the Wes Anderson look to it and the feel to it, so that's great. So there is something else going on here that is interesting thematically. Like I was saying, just sort of plot-wise, there's not really much to worry about. But it feels like we're sort of building up to the Benedict Cumberbatch character. That's what a lot of the structure of the movie feels like. And yes, when Cumberbatch does come into the movie, there's just wonderful payoffs in this wonderfully absurd climax. So, and the Desplat score, of course, whenever, any of his scores, but when he's teamed up with Anderson especially, there's some real magic there, musically also. So, yeah, like I said, it's not like, you know, one of the perfect Wes Anderson movies, but like I said, if you're like me and you're just completely on this Anderson train no matter what at this point, this is perfectly satisfying. So there's that. Let's do this Jenna Ortega double now quickly. I think I was gonna do this the other way around, but I'm gonna start with Winter, Spring, Summer, or Fall. This romance movie with Percy Hines White, her Wednesday co-star. And this is a movie that I didn't really know. I didn't know what it was or really anything about it. I just knew that they were in it and that the critics pretty much tore it apart. And it was like a romance movie. So, needless to say, even though I have done a lot of praising of Jenna Ortega, who I'm still a big fan of, I didn't really have any expectations for this movie set, one way or the other. I just kind of went into it because I was curious. I'm just curious about her career and how she's building as an actress. And to be honest, I'm perfectly fine with this movie. It sort of feels like it's kind of doing, like, when you look at the title, the structure is basically like, it's kind of like the Before trilogy is what I feel like they're going for. But instead of, like, one day out of each 9 years, it's one day out of each season for 1 year, is what the structure is, where they meet in the winter, and then they meet again in the spring, and in the summer and fall, as you can guess. But in those, in the halfway point, there is kind of a turn where there's more, it's not just like a fleeting meeting, it does become more of a serious relationship once we meet that second half, and then how we see the sort of roller coaster that a fleeting romance can be. And to be honest, you could say, like, there's, you know, contrivances thrown in and stuff like that, and how a lot of the conflict seems pretty obvious, or it's like, oh, characters could easily solve this by doing this, or saying this, or whatever. But when you're dealing with the kind of love that's established in this way, where it's like young love, where these people are just kind of still at this maturity level to where they're having these feelings for the first time and they don't really know what to do with them or how to handle them, so they can become sort of erratic and make bad decisions and all that. It felt surprisingly real to me. Like, when it feels contrived, or when it feels like a character is being erratic for the sake of it, it being a sort of first love movie, I kind of felt like that added up. Like it made sense for the characters to not make sense, because we don't really make sense when we're a teenager falling in love for the first time. And we will make bad calls and bad decisions and embarrass ourselves and do that whole thing. And I felt like this movie portrayed that pretty straightforwardly, where it's not really attempting to be anything else that's like super deep about what it is in all this. It's just basically observing these two characters as they fall in love and then hit, these conflicts and don't know what to do when they get there. It's like, actually, instead of it being a moment like you would typically have in a romance movie, where it's like when a character finally realizes they've made a dumb decision and you think like, well, God, it took the writers long enough, like they dragged this out long enough. It felt like it felt like a relief of like, oh, finally this character realizes that it doesn't have to be this hard. And there's something satisfying when it actually reaches those moments, I thought. I was just really surprised. And I said, I don't know if it's just because I didn't have any expectations or what, and the fact that I knew that, like, critics had torn it apart. And I can see where those critics are probably coming from, because I can see what they I didn't, like, read those or anything, but I can assume by looking at it what their problems probably were, and I get it. And maybe, if this movie was like slightly tweaked, or if it was like different actors or a different director or writer or whatever, it might be something that I just hated, and something that's like, oh, the conflicts are so stupid and I can't stand these characters and I wish they would just figure it out so this can end. But I never felt that way. Like I said, everything felt sort of real enough and grounded enough that it just felt like observing emotions that you can recognize. And so it's like, when a character does something frustrating, it's still frustrating, but you have that sort of retrospective moment of, but in their minds, I get it. And so, yeah, and there's like this sort of, when it first starts and they first meet in the winter and we first see that, there is like this sort of, cutesy element to it, where they bond over talking heads and stuff like that. But it never felt like it was trying too hard to have that vibe. Like, it felt just sort of naturally charming. Because in movies like this, when the filmmakers kind of desperately want you to feel the characters falling in love, it can get very sort of like they're really laying it on thick and they're being really cutesy about it. And I didn't get that from this. It felt very naturally charming as it went, and sort of low-key about their sort of first connection and that sort of first spark that happens, that leads into the second time they end up meeting up. And so yeah, I was okay with this. And that vibe, once we get to that point, when we get to the middle portion, the summer portion, and it just kind of has that vibe, that like summer fling vibe, where like a lot of it's in montage, which would also be something that's typically annoying, but I like the way the montages captured like the fleeting nature of a summer fling, where it's like like when you're in the moment, it feels like time is like infinite and like years have gone by, and then it's like literally a week or so. And it's like, I feel like the montages in particular kind of really captured that, where it's like not a lot of time has passed, but you can tell for them it feels like it has. So that's something really impressive to pull off, like visually, like that. And there's a great moment towards the end when they're talking, and the way it trusts itself visually, like it trusts itself with just like the body language of the characters, where they're talking and they're having this conversation, they're kind of opening up, and then the dialogue fades out and music comes in, and we're just watching them communicate, but we know what's going on between them. Just with that, we didn't even, like, the movie realized we didn't even need the dialogue at that point. We could just watch them and know what's going on and what they're feeling, and that also is, like, really impressive. And the fact that, like I said, when those conflicts come up, while they might seem contrived, it does also feel like it's just the sort of immaturity that comes with the age. And a lot of the conflict is also just based on unfortunate timing, which is also something that tends to break people up. Even people that are like madly in love. So, yeah, and there are moments that are a bit jarring. Sure, like how much her parents suck. For instance, like given the choice that she makes in the moment when like the summer portion is starting. Once again, like we can understand being young and in love and making decisions that are really really stupid. But the way her parents react to this, while there is certain understanding of, wow, this is like the worst decision she could possibly make. She might very well wreck her life. She is going to wreck her life if this is the decision she makes. But the way her parents react to this is so psychotic that I don't that it felt so psychotic. It's like one of those cases where it's like you're not even sure who to side with, and it kind of adds this other level of her not knowing what to do with her life or what direction to go if the rest of her life is this erratic and insane. So it does kind of add to the character making those decisions. Even if in the moment it does feel like, well, this is a left turn, okay. There's also, just as a small thing, there's also the moment where they're driving out to the house during the summer portion, and that's like the weirdest background driving effect I've maybe ever seen. I don't know what was up with that, but that was weird, and I don't think it was intended to stand out as much as it does in the wrong way, but it's fine. As far as like the romance of the movie and the feel of it and it doing that sort of fleeting love thing, and all those emotions being there, I feel like it handled all that really well. And like I said, when it even gets to the point at the end where it becomes a very conventional, romantic, go get them ending, I felt like I was rooting for them. And in cases like this, I feel like that doesn't happen too often because we've seen this so often and it can feel so played out. Especially by the time we're at, 2025 now. It feels like movies like this shouldn't work as well as I think this one does, but yeah, I was kind of in on this one, so that really surprised me. So, and Jenna Ortega, of course, continues to be, I've been saying for a while now that she's been so promising at this point. And while she has made some, questionable decisions when it's like like Miller's Girl and stuff like that, or what we're about to talk about, I feel like these are, and I think it helps a lot that a lot of these movies tend to work because of her strengths, and that's something that's really important to show off when you're an actress that's really trying to start, really building a career, like a really serious career. And this one in particular just kind of worked for me. So let's go the opposite way now. So Hurry Up Tomorrow, or as I was calling it, Hurry Up and Fucking End, for most of the movie. So, here's the thing. I don't really have a particular connection to The Weeknd. In fact, I don't really know. I know like maybe one or two of his songs if I hear them. Otherwise, I don't know. But that's not a Weeknd thing. That's a me with like modern music in general thing, where I don't really know who I'm hearing whenever I hear like current music, and a lot of it, I'm old at this point, so it all sounds the same to me. I'm just at that place in my life. So that's not to say anything against him or his talent. It's just me being an old person, that doesn't really register. But I get that he's definitely got talent, and that voice that he's able to show off in the movie in particular, like to actually see him performing and all that, it's like I get why this is somebody that's as big as he is. And, I've seen an interview here and there, and he seems like a nice enough guy, too. So, the way I feel like attacking this movie, I'm hesitating, but I just really, I despise this movie. But I do want it to be known that I don't really have anything against The Weeknd himself, or Abel Tesfaye himself, whatever he wants to be called now. So, all of that being said, and I know he has a very, 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 very supportive fan base that I'm sure took to this well for the most part. So, like I said, I'm just coming from my place. So, all of that being said, no personal attacks or anything like that intended. This is... Okay, so when The Idol came out, I didn't watch it or anything, but I heard all the terrible things about it, and I kept hearing vanity project being a word that was thrown around, a phrase that was being thrown around. And so that's a term that can get thrown around in an empty way a lot. Where, like, if it's just, like, somebody who makes a very passionate project that really, truly comes from the heart, you will still see people left and right calling it a vanity project regardless. Like, it's like it's lost its meaning a little bit. With that being said, this, yes, 100% by definition matches the phrase vanity project. This is like, if anybody's old enough to remember Masked and Anonymous, the Bob Dylan movie that had a massive, massive cast list of actors, and it was a Bob Dylan movie starring Bob Dylan, and basically the whole purpose of the movie was to bring in all these famous faces to basically talk about and analyze and obsess over the fact that Bob Dylan is the greatest genius who ever lived. So, this is basically The Weeknd's Masked and Anonymous. Only we're really focusing on the Jenna Ortega character specifically, but and Barry Keoghan as well, where the movie basically exists for The Weeknd, who is credited as a co-writer and plays himself. This movie that's basically all about how The Weeknd is a torture genius and this troubled god of the stage, who's going through this sort of path of self-destruction as this insane person comes into his life and throws everything into chaos. Trey Edward Schultz directed this and co-wrote it. He is an acclaimed director. People have certain opinions about certain things. He did a horror movie that I loved called It Comes at Night. Nobody else loved that movie, but I did. And he also did Waves, which is it's a drama, but it's also very music-based, like very music-themed throughout it. And in this wheelhouse that The Weeknd is in. So, he sort of makes sense for this project, I guess, if you're looking at Waves specifically. And sort of those surreal horror elements maybe that was in stuff like It Comes at Night. Maybe. I was thinking, as we went on, that he started to feel like less and less of a fit as it went on, and I wondered, especially with the Jenna Ortega storyline, and the chaos that involves, and the way we see, like, this sort of... We see, like, his party life and this sort of self-destructive path that he goes down. I was starting to feel like what a director like Harmony Korine might have been able to do with this, maybe, if it would have made a bit more sense as it went on, as far as it feeling like that kind of movie. But here, it does feel more like it's just obnoxious above all else. When we're in those moments where it's like it's montaging and it's like all the flashing lights and the drug-fueled, alcohol-fueled everything, where it's like, I get the vibe we're supposed to feel and how swept up we're supposed to get in this sort of self-destructive thing. It's just all feels obnoxious. and it's after the fact, after we've watched him perform for like the third time. And it feels very directionless until somebody pops in to say, like Barry Keoghan especially, whose whole character is basically there to just build him up. I don't know if his character's supposed to be like representative of like his ego or something, but it feels both reflective in a way, I guess, but if that's the whole way they were going, it's not coming through. It feels like it's getting to the point of he's praised of this as this, god of the stage and this tortured genius, and his music's so deep, and if they were taking that to another level and giving it another layer, it doesn't reach that successfully. It only feels like the self-praise as it goes on, especially the moments where Jenna Ortega just has him tied up and is just talking about how brilliant, playing his music from beginning to end and talking about how brilliant and layered his lyrics are and what they mean and all that. And this is like, and to have like a cast of characters played by actors like Jenna Ortega, and Barry Keoghan, who's like this really diverse Oscar-nominated actor at this point, who's become really respected, and these characters just worship the ground you walk on. That's, like I said, it's really, you're not breaking through that in a way thematically that you were probably trying for, and it just feels fucking endless. Like, the whole thing. Well, first of all, the opening alone is like 20 minutes long. It's like, by the time the opening credits end, we're like 20 minutes in. If that doesn't say anything in itself. But it actually got to a point where I was like, I started to wonder if it was ever going to feel like I was watching a movie. Because it kind of just continued to feel like an opening for a very, very, very long time. And talking about that directionlessness of it. And it's like the only time it seems to have some sort of direction, it feels like it's going in, is when Ortega is on screen. But it's even then, it's like, so the Barry Keoghan scenes just sort of feel like, oh, like, you know, we should worship you, you're the stage god, like, that cheering out there is all for you, it's all about you, they feed off of you because you're such a genius. And then you have the Jenna Ortega thing going on parallel, and then when she finally comes in and we kind of get some questions answered that have been raised throughout the movie, yeah, then we get a very long sequence where he gets tied to a bed, and the self-praise continues. And like I said, if it's supposed to be more like self-loathing, I can vaguely see that being the intention. But like I said, it's not hitting and it's not coming through. So this just feels like just non-stop, just completely fitting the vanity project label everybody's giving it. This is a case where I feel like people are right on point when they use that phrase. And like I said, it's very overused and can be abused, but in this particular case, I can't remember the last time I saw something this fucking self-indulgent. and it's just, and the way, like I said, the way it's made just becomes obnoxious, and I just can't pull away from it with any redeeming factors. It's just an absolute piece of shit. And that's what I'm walk away from this movie with. So, like I said, if his fans took to it, then that's good for them. There's even moments where it's addressed, like Barry Keoghan brings up the idol without saying the idol and says, like, you know, oh, he says, like, fuck that fucking TV show, you know, you tried it and it didn't work, so what? So he's literally addressing that his acting thing, he tried it and it didn't work. So now with this movie, he basically knows that the stove is hot and we're watching him touch it again for an hour and 45 minutes. So, that's what I take away from this. What a waste of what Barry Keoghan can do, what a waste of what Ortega can do. It's just this void of self-indulgent nothingness, and that's all I can say. So, we're going to leave that at that. I don't even know what the next thing's going to be. Whether it's going to be something that was like just released or something that was released, you know, a couple months ago or whatever. We're probably just going to jump around and kind of get caught up, but also go back a little bit and try to touch on everything as we go. And we'll get there. So until the next thing, I think that's it.